And I thought to myself, well, if I want to, I could just run like heck. But I was to the point by then, I was thinking to myself, something's stalking me. And so I squatted down up over in this vicinity here, because I can see where I came over the top there. Right. And so over on this side is where I heard the sounds. And of course I'm sitting there listening and listening and listening, and it got real quiet. I'm getting ready to get up and make my way back down. And that's when I heard step, step. So I'm be squatted down like this, and I'm listening, and then I hear it go above me, and I'm like, oh my God.
We are down at Coshocton, near Coshocton, Ohio, near the Woodbury Wildlife Management Area, and we are heading into an area that I've heard a lot about over the years. This is a place that when I was first getting into Bigfoot stuff, you heard tons of stories about activity around the Woodbury Wildlife Management Area. One of the earliest stories I was ever given by I guess you'd call it a witness. There was a guy named Bob Sutton who messaged me on Facebook once and told me a story about coming down here and finding multiple dead ducks. And I think it's around this area. That's 541 over behind us. It's a road that runs through the area. He had come in on 541, parked somewhere, and walked in and found these ducks, like 12 ducks, just stuffed up in trees, kind of in the crevice of a tree. That was one of the first stories I ever heard about Woodbury. But tomorrow we're gonna come in here with Marc DeWerth. Marc is one of the main BFRO investigators, or was one of the main BFRO investigators in the state of Ohio. He still runs the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, which is one of the biggest Sasquatch events in the country. That takes place at Salt Fork, but Marc has had multiple encounters inside Woodbury. So tomorrow we're gonna come in here with Marc, but tonight I wanted to come in ahead of time and hike in and just see if we can experience anything and kind of explore the place for ourselves. Coshocton County is a mix of rolling hills, winding rivers, and dense woodlands, creating a landscape that feels both rugged and peaceful. The Wahonding and Tuscarawas rivers come together here to form the Muskingum River, shaping the land with fertile valleys and meandering waterways. The area sits right where the Appalachian foothills start to rise, so while there are plenty of steep ridges and deep hollows, you'll also find open farmland and gently sloping meadows. Ancient glaciers left their mark to the north, smoothing out some areas, but much of the county remains untouched with rocky outcrops, hidden caves, and thick forests, giving it a wild, natural beauty. I've been here numerous times. Heck, we shot our 2019 film Momo here. However, somehow I've just never had the chance to explore this particular Bigfoot habitat. One of the more well-known pieces of Ohio Bigfoot footage was shot in this exact place on August 2nd, 1992, by renowned researcher Don Keating, the White Bigfoot Video. I was informed just a day later that the area I'd hiked was exactly where that piece of footage had been shot. Marc DeWerth had told me that there's a strip lake back here. So it hit me that this is all strip mine land, I think. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between formerly strip mine land and Sasquatch activity, because this place is strip mined. Minerva, right around the Keating's house, was strip mined. And the St. Peter's Church Road behind Bolivar, where I grew up, where all the Bigfoot activity occurred in the 1970s, that was also strip mine property. So it's just interesting. I just noticed there might be a correlation there. I came to learn that the Woodbury Wildlife Management Area was once a major site for strip mining, primarily for coal during the mid-20th century. After mining operations ceased, extensive land reclamation efforts transformed the area, restoring vegetation and creating diverse habitats for wildlife, maybe even Bigfoot. As the sun set in the February sky, the temperatures began to dip into the low teens. I set about making the 2-mile trek back to my car, ready to wake up early the next day, and excited to meet up with Marc DeWerth at a location not too far from Woodbury. So we are heading into the Wills Creek area of Coshocton, which again, like last night, we were in an area that I was very familiar with, just based on witness stories that I've heard over the years. This area is unique because we're heading here following Marc DeWerth currently. And like I said last night, Marc is one of the BFRO heads in Ohio, but Marc had a sighting in this location, and we're going to get him to talk about it and take us to the area where it happened. But yeah, this is Wills Creek. I've heard stories about this area for decades. This is a place that is very important in Ohio Bigfoot lore, and like so many other places in Ohio where there's like known activity, this is not really known. This activity is not known outside of a very small group of Ohio Bigfooters or Bigfoot enthusiasts. So it's different from like the PNW, where you have a place like the Olympic Peninsula where everyone kind of knows that it's a Bigfoot habitat. In Ohio, you have places like Minerva and Salem and Woodbury and Wills Creek that are names that, people that have been into this know, but outside of a very small group of people, these are not well-known places. So I'm excited to get in here because I've heard Marc's sighting story. It's really interesting. And when I was first getting into all this, I remember going to a library presentation that Marc gave and hearing him tell this story. And so getting him to this location and having him tell that story, I'm really excited to get to do that and to explore the area a little bit. What are we doing? So you want me to pull up the sighting?
We walked it right back, and then eventually just picked the trail up and just went all the way back. But now when I look at it, it's like, wow, this is all like invasive species, a lot of this multifloral rose and honeysuckle and all this stuff. And so it's just not the friendliest place anymore.
What year was that?
1997, April 20th. Yeah, wow. Look at this, is all grapevine, hackberry, honeysuckle, silver and black maple, all mixed in through here.
How did you hear about this spot, though?
You know what? It's because of Mark Francis used to live. If we would have continued straight, crossed over Wills Creek, There's a road that goes to the left that goes on the other side of Wills Creek. Mark Francis had like a little rental property there that he would go and hang out. Well, he had a lot of hair-raising experiences over the years. And then, of course, he told me about the Ed Daniels story with the Sasquatch Valley. And, of course, Keating always knew about that barn, but the guy would never talk to Keating. I don't know why.
Okay, what's the Sasquatch Valley story?
Well, the Sasquatch Valley is because Ed Daniels, he was a retired Ford worker in Lorain County. I think he worked at the van plant where they made those vans up there in Avon. And when he retired, he had always had this as their summer property, as he liked to hunt and fish. Well, when Ed Daniels, matter of fact, right where we are, there's maybe about a mile and a half back that way, there's what we call a strip pond. That would be like a pond that was reclaimed, but then the ODNR stocked it with fish. Yeah. Well, he went back there to fish one morning, and he's walking back with his pole and his tackle box, and as he got right almost to the edge of the pond, he heard what he said like a mother goose in panic. And as he came to the edge and looked to his left, it wasn't a mother goose, it was a Sasquatch. A female Sasquatch, though. And I said, well, how would you know it was a female? He says, well, it had obvious breasts. They were hanging there. And he said it had very wide hips as in compared to its waist. He says, almost like a woman that's had many children. And he said it was making this kind of this goose sound as it was walking away from him. And he said, I just stood there with my jaw hanging to the ground watching this thing. And he says, well, it was walking the edge of the strip pond. And guess who was standing on the tree edge in the distance? The big one. The big one stepped out. She walked behind it, continued in the woods, and he said it kind of made like kind of a grumble sound that he could barely hear because of the distance. But he said right then and there he turned, came back. Well, then maybe about 3 years later, he was hunting over in this part of Wills Creek. Maybe about a mile that way is a place called Eagle Rock. In Eagle Rock, you could take your four-wheel drive, get down as far as you could, park, and probably get within a half mile of it, and you'd have to walk into it. And he said he found this rock overhang. He says it almost looked like a perfect cave. And so he was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But as he got closer to it, he noticed bone scatters everywhere, more bones, piles of bones. So as he got closer, there was a little kind of a rock step up into the opening of this kind of overhang, because there's no true caves here. Yeah. And he took a peek in. He says it smelled awful. And he said all of a sudden he hears growling. But the growling wasn't from in the cave. Behind him. He turned around and looked, and standing there in the woodline was the big black one, as he said. And it had its lip up, it was growling at him. He said, he had a gun, and he said, I just backed down, get the heck out, and came back, told his wife and everything like that. And so after those experiences, that's when he did the shed back there. It's not there anymore, and there was the Sasquatch Valley in white. And so that was kind of known in the area. And Francis is the only one I know who ever interviewed him. And, but you know how I chatted with him once, and I did the old trickaroo, because I drove a Jeep too. If you didn't know me back then, I had a Wrangler. And good thing about Wranglers, they're not too reliable. They always end up choking and breaking down. So I'd pretend I was broken down in front of the place. He came out, do you need a hand? And I'm like, I don't know. And I just had like one of the wires disconnected to make it like it wasn't working. And then I looked over at his barn. I said, what's the Sasquatch Valley about? He goes, oh, there's Bigfoots around here. And that's all he said. But at least he said it. Yeah. So it kind of made me validate some of the other things that people were saying. But Francis, I remember he came over to my house years ago when I lived in Strongsville. And he sat in my basement till 4 in the morning telling me stories about over here. And he told me about the birthday video. And Don knows about it. I don't know if he ever saw it. But Francis says, yeah, they're filming the birthday. Here's the back deck behind the single wide. And you see something big stand up, start walking up the hill from behind it. It's a big hair-covered creature, so.
And that video's just gone, right?
Yeah, people tried to get Ed Daniels to, he would not release it. Okay. He wouldn't do anything. He didn't want anything to do with it. Yeah. I mean, it was just, probably more privacy. Okay. I mean, that's what I would think, because he did not seem in any way, in my honest opinion, as someone that was making it up. Yeah. He was very matter of fact. He was more just like, leave me alone.
He probably was not involved in it.
No, not involved at all. None of that stuff.
But, those are the best witnesses.
Of course. My best witnesses I've ever interviewed, and I've been interviewed probably close to 350 or 400 witnesses in Ohio alone, are ones that just totally want total confidentiality. Yeah. I mean, and then those are the best ones, because what I always do with those kind of witnesses is, as a rule of thumb, is I always keep those stories in the back of my mind, because I might retell it at a talk or something, let's say, and then I'll like run into them out of the blue. And so here'd be me, let's just say their sighting took place at 4:05 p.m. Say, God, I remember your sighting back in, 78, happened in the morning at, 9 a.m. and immediately they stopped. No, it didn't. It happened in the afternoon.
Yeah.
They recorrect you.
Yeah.
Because something like that is a game changer or a life changer. So when you have a life-changing incident, you're not gonna, it's like having your kids. You don't forget the time. People don't forget.
Yeah.
I mean, you've heard some of my stories I've retold. And, one that stands out is that the guy I went and saw at Canton Hospital, who was on his deathbed of cancer, and his kids made fun of him for years about his incident in Noble County, where he fell like into the side embankment of a creek. Like his body got stuck down in there, like he fell in, the earth failed. Well, here's the creek over here. And when he pulled himself out, he looked down. It was hollow underneath, and there was an actual shoreline going up to an underwater kind of reservoir. And he saw 3 huge sets of tracks, plain as day, right in there. And he got followed out. He says, I was never more scared in my life. And his kids made fun of him. And by the time he ended up telling me the story and I explained some of the history of the area, his kids were bawling their eyes out because they realized they made fun of Dad all these years, and he was telling the truth.
Right.
Those are the kinds of stories that stick with you. So, well, let's go find the dog.
A life-changing incident is something that I've experienced for myself. Mine was a Bigfoot sighting in Minerva back in 2021. I still replay that event in my head nearly every day. The lingering effects are somewhere between a pleasant sort of nostalgia, a frustrating mystery that I'm always trying to unravel, and a puzzle that I'm trying to put together, but always find myself missing different pieces. For Marc, there seems to be an almost giddy excitement in being here. Seeing him wandering the forest where his first encounter happened is honestly refreshing. So many researchers who invest themselves in the subject eventually find themselves burned out, bored, or angry by either the so-called community, the lack of answers that the topic offers, or just a general malaise that comes from spending decades searching for something that most people say doesn't exist. Sometimes it's all three. But to my eyes, Marc isn't struggling with any of that. He's enthusiastic to be here and to return to the scene of his own life-changing event.
Wow, I remember that. Yeah, look at this. This is looking familiar. And I've been back, but I've been back over the years, but not like, sometimes I'll go 3-4 years and never even come back here. And then someone will say, hey, could you take me down to the area where your incident happened? And it's like, well, let's go find it. And of course, after you look around for a bit, you realize where you are, but I can tell by the contour. If you continue going back, this is like a tiered shelf strip mine. So if you hike all the way back to there's a big coal pile about 1.25 miles back. And that's when the hunters, back in 1996, last day of gun season, we were at the 541 Beverage and Tackle store. And I remember I had, the hokey Bigfoot cards. And of course, back then it was an embarrassing thing to put anything on a board saying, hey, do you know about Bigfoot? You're scared, you pin and run like heck. Well, lo and behold, I put this card up on the board, and within a few, could be 30 seconds, someone like, huh? Hey, I saw you put the card on the board. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought he was the owner. And he goes, no, I've heard stories about Bigfoot, but he goes, I've never seen anything. But he goes, have you ever heard of badgers in Ohio? I'm like, badgers in Ohio? I said, they're not supposed to be in Ohio, no chance at all. He goes, no, my buddy and I were down in an area called Wills Creek, and we were back in the area going to go fishing, and we found 2 badgers come out of what he called a den. So he told me how to get to it. And of course he explained about coming down 83, hitting 410 and turning this way. And he said, you'll see he had this giant Jeep with the big mud tires on it. He goes, you'll see my ruts because we drive back as far as we can go, then get out and walk. Sure as heck, the following year would have been April of 97. And kind of what delayed me ever to get down here to even look was because it was a non-Bigfoot thing for one. And two, it was so wet that spring And I remember it was a Sunday, and and we're kind of like, well, what do you want to do? Well, let's just go home. And then finally I said, hey, why don't we go check out that area where that guy claimed there were the badgers? I'd like to go check that out. And so the couple cars of us, we came down here, and 3 of us hiked way back in here, looked around, went to where the badger and right where the guy said there was like holes in there, but there were no badgers. But on the way back, I said, well, why should we go down to the tier? Let's just go the straight flat method, because we were on the mid tier then.
Yeah.
And we just came straight down, like about 1.25 miles that way, this direction. And so we started hiking, and within maybe less than a minute from when we left where we were standing by the coal pile, we started hearing all this movement above us on the next tier of the strip mine. And of course, anyone who lives in Ohio, what are you going to think it is? Deer.
Yeah.
Because they bed down, they're all bed down. It was that time of the year where food was going to start becoming abundant, so they're getting ready and prepped for everything. And as we made our way out, we kept hearing all the sounds. We'd stop, look around, didn't see anything, and it went on and on for maybe 5-6 minutes. And I finally said to the guy, and I said, hey, either you or I go ahead and the other one wait back, and let's just see if we could spook the deer out and see, and get your camera ready, because we all have those little 35, the little film cameras, stuff like that. And so he goes, well, I'll lead out. And so he headed out, and I just sat there like on just a fallen tree, and I just sat there and listened. And it was beautiful sunny day, about 50 degrees. And so I waited and waited, and it could have been 10 minutes went by. And I said, okay, time to walk. Started doing my walking. And literally within 15 seconds of starting to move, right above me, movement. I'm thinking, that's interesting. So here's me, no guns, no knives, but I did have a can of bear mace. So I pulled this little aerosol can. I got it as like a Christmas present. I'm thinking, well, if something's coming, at least I'll have this. But I had a full pack on, like the metal frame one, with gear. I had a brand new camcorder. I had cameras. I had all plaster, everything. And so I continued walking. And so I'd walk maybe for a few feet, and then all of a sudden you hear movement. I'd stop. It would stop. I'd go. It would go. So it finally got to the point where it seemed like it took forever. And it probably did. Probably took 20 minutes of just playing this game. And I finally got to the point up here where, like, as you can see, it's kind of flattens up somewhat up in the distance in that direction. Well, when I got to that point, I realized, well, heck, my vehicle, I could see, because you know how your Jeep, some of the Jeeps have the lights on the top. I had the one with the big 4 lights with the yellow smiley face covers. I could see the covers. And I thought to myself, well, if I want to, I could just run like heck. But I was to the point by then, I was thinking to myself, something's stalking me, and what kind of animal stalks? Well, a cat. Well, there were rumors of a panther down here. So I'm thinking, don't tell me there's there's. So if I ran, what was the panther gonna do? Chase me, just like a house cat would. And so I just continued coming down over the hill, and I just, like, all of a sudden, when I got to these pines over here.
So this is literally, this location is where
we're pretty close. Just like where he's standing up there.
Can we get up
yeah,
there?
let's head on up there.
I want to see it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I do miss this area. I really do. Yeah.
Okay, so you were like here?
Oh yeah, I'd have been coming down in here, and then when I started deciding to squat down, because I can see where I'm looking at now. See where these fallen trees are?
Yeah.
They were a lot smaller back then. And so I squatted down up over in this vicinity here, because I can see where I came over the top there.
Right.
And so over on this side is where I heard the sounds. And of course I'm sitting there listening and listening and listening, and it got real quiet. And now of course, when you're expecting to hear the whatever following you come, it never did. But if you notice, what do you notice right here? You'll see on that little ridge, look what the land's doing. It starts turning. Because it's turning following the contour of the strip mine, so it's heading that direction rather than that direction. So I was at that turn point where then I'm listening, nothing, listening. I'm getting ready to get up and make my way back down. And that's when I heard step, step. So I'm being squatted down like this, and I'm listening, and then I hear it go above me, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a person. Because of the footfalls.
Which shelf are they on? Which shelf up here?
Yes, the next shelf up is where.
So not this one, but one above it.
Well,
or this?
okay. Well, the initial Bigfoot that I would have seen would have been pretty close to one of these trees over here, but it wouldn't have been the pine.
Okay.
Because the branching, see how the branching is on the pine, it has all that extra branching? This tree had a branch of roughly 11 foot off the ground, because when I stood up and it turned and looked at me, because it was squatted down.
Right.
And I stood up, I see the thing squatted down in the distance, and I'm thinking black bear, jet black in color, sunny day. And I'm like, oh my God, a black bear. I go to take my pack off, and when I made the noise to get this big metal frame pack off of me, this is when it stood up. And when it stood up and it turned its torso and looked toward me, that's when I realized I saw the sun hit here.
Yeah.
And when you see ears here and no snout, it was flat as a piece of plywood, the face looked at from a side view.
Okay.
And when it turned and looked, it went, and I literally almost went right over that edge there, because I stepped back so far, because I got so, of course, it's called common sense, you get scared. And it looked at me, I had the pack done, I knew I had the camcorder in there. I go like this. As soon as I make that move, it immediately turns, walks right up to that tier up above there. And I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed my pack, went up at an angle, got up to where it was by the tree, dropped the pack with the camcorder out, went up over on the tier and tried to film this thing. And it was going in that direction. And it literally, I mean, let's just go up there. I think it'd be easier.
Yeah.
My body took me in this direction trying to follow the contour because I knew it was going this way. And I get to the point where I realized that basically I was scared to death, but didn't realize it, because what happens is the excitement overwhelmed the fear.
Yeah.
And then when I'm standing here filming this way like this, that's when it happened. And like I said, the turn of the strip mine, see the contour turning? So as I'm standing over here filming, and the only way I can explain it is if you took like a deep freezer full of meat and you dumped it from the top and just let gravity pull it down. Like something was coming at me. And you could even hear in my video, oh, as I pan to that direction, because of course I'm thinking, what the, you know, like, what's going on here? So I'm shaking, and then all of a sudden, remember, my friend walked to the car. All of a sudden so you imagine you're this, scared to death, and then all of a sudden you hear your name called. So here's me like, what? And then, oh, then I yelled, I'm up here, you know, and he came up, and I remember him walking up, and he walked on this side of me. And I remember him looking at me, he says, what'd you just see, a ghost? And I'm, Bigfoot. He's like, what, where? There's, you know, and I couldn't explain it. And he says, can you just pause recording? And I did. I stopped recording, calmed down. He said he looked like I was going through shock.
Did you film it?
I filmed a little bit of it.
But you will not let anyone see this video.
You know,
I've talked to you about
haven't
this.
I showed you the video?
You've never showed me the video because you said you don't like people to see it.
Yeah, no, it was, and here's the scary thing. Three men walk in, go a mile, a quarter mile and a half back. So I'm guessing when we walked in, they were bedded down up here, thinking, what's up? So probably one of them followed three of us back, just to see what we were doing. And then when one left and two stayed, that becomes a decision. When there's one Bigfoot, there's always more than one. Because while you're there like this, look, the other one's standing right there pointing at you going, look, a person. You know, it's like, hey, I just saw Seth Breedlove, there he is. And Seth's looking over there panicking, and he doesn't even know it. I mean, so Bigfoot's, I think it's the same thing.
Go back to the face. You talked about how it was flat.
Yes,
So,
for example,
yeah.
the thing that stood out the most to me, so now you see how we have the sun, and the sun was kind of like in this direction. So when it went from like, say, this position, and there'd be me back there, and so then it heard me because of my pack, so it goes like this. And that's when I realized the black bear wasn't a bear, because when it went like this, I saw this. the ear on this side of the head because the sunlight hit it right on the dark jet black hair. And when I saw the side profile, I was like, oh, there's no snout. It's so flat. And it turned and looked, and it turned its whole torso and body like this and looked, and then it goes, like its mouth just kind of did the drop, like what are you doing there?
Right.
And I was like, and like that's when I almost went over the tear.
Describe what the ear looked like. That's a really
very,
odd detail.
very human.
Okay.
Because, I mean, think about it. Even people with long hair, and they comb around it like this, when the sun hits the side, your ear kind of illuminates. So if you have like one of those big mushroom ears, you'd notice it.
Right.
But I mean, to me, it looked very tight on the head.
Okay.
And remember, I'm about 70, I think we measured 73, 74 feet away, which is still a good distance.
Yeah.
But you could see where the ears were and how they sat on the head. And the thing that really struck me was like, you know, and I hate to use this term, it was kind of handsome. Because when it looked like its face, like, you know how like your beard is, it had that nice facial hair, the skin, like from at least with the sun hitting in the face, the best way would be like a whitewash gray, because you know, with sun hitting gray, kind of, but the thing is the eyes sat deep, very deep. Okay. And you could see the thick, like people explain that thick brow. It definitely had a thick brow, and I wonder if that's because their vision is so good at night, they kind of have that tunnel effect, because that would cause sunken eyes to be able to take the least light in to kind of see what you're looking.
Sit back
yeah, that's what it gave me the impression. But I mean, in terms of that, the hair looked, I mean, glistening. And I know
when you say hair or fur?
It was her hair, no doubt.
So
I could see hair hanging off the elbow and everything like that. But how close were you though? And did you
150 yards maybe?
Yeah, and I was 73 feet.
Okay.
So remember, anything at a distance, we're going to say it's fur.
Yeah.
Because common sense is going to say, well, hey, it must be a bear with fur. And then the bear gets up and starts running, and you're like, wait a minute, bears don't do that. And so, no, it was...
Was there any difference in color with the ear from the rest of...
No. Here's the thing is, remember, the sun whitewashed out the side of the head.
Okay.
So the glisten on the hair made the ear look kind of, I would say, like a lighter than the gray on the face, let's just say. But I mean, you have to think though that the ears are usually covered mostly with hair, so they don't get as much exposure to elements, to sun and everything like that.
The movement that you saw when it took off up the hill.
You know, and I've said this in lectures before, it almost looked like it floated up, but I could see its legs moving. Even someone in the greatest athletes we have would have issues, because not only on a straight line concrete surface we could do it, but when you start adding this in, this is where you have that, you know, me, I'm grabbing stuff. I am grabbing stuff to get up, trying to hold the stupid camcorder, the whole 9 yards. And you know, I still have that camcorder.
Yeah.
And I almost brought it to show you.
I wish you would have. When you saw it going up, did anything about it, could you see arms pumping, legs moving?
I definitely, I was concentrating on the legs because it was happening so fast. But remember, once it went up, my instinctive was to grab the camcorder and go after it. And of course it went in that direction. And like I say, as you can see, you look at the tops of the trees even today, and we have a little bit of a breeze. That day was that perfect spring day. Every bird, there was no silence in the woods. If they would have just sat there and been quiet the whole time, we would have came up, came on and been gone, and they would have never known it. But like I say, just the luck of the draw that, hey, one of us said, hey, I'm going back to go see the bald eagle's nest over on the other side of the lake. So that created that separation. And of course, they're very in tune of what's going on. So when all of a sudden, what are they doing? They must be trying to trick us, you know, and I'm sure that's what they think.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would have done differently? Like if you could relive the day that you had your experience?
Oh, yes. I would have gone by my rule that Don always told me. When you get out of your car, have your camcorder in your hand ready to film, not in your pack. Oh, and by the way, another thing is my wife, like I remember, well, at that time it was my girlfriend, she destroyed me after, you know, coming home with this video because I never read the directions on the brand new camcorder that I never used. So I'm literally trying to figure out how to get this thing to work. If I would have been, like, say, with this in my hand, just like this, and that would have happened, I would have had a film that would have blown the Patterson film away. Away. I mean, it was unbelievable. And here's another, just a little side fact about it that was interesting. So that happened on a Sunday. On Monday, and granted, I didn't sleep for probably 2 or 3 days. I was just a zombie. And so, but I called down to the Muskingum Watershed District that manages Wills Creek. And I called on the phone. I said, hi, I'd like to talk to you about something that happened yesterday over by Wills Creek on County Road, you know, beep, beep, 410, whatever, you know, that is right there. So, and I called them and I said, hey, you know, I was hiking over off of County Road 410 by one of the old strip mines, and you know, I saw like the best thing I could explain was like a large gorilla. And you know what his answer was? Which one? I said, what? Which one? The reddish brown one or the black one? Black one. Did it try to hurt you? No, never does. I'm like, what? I said, you know about this? He goes, I've been working here like almost 30 years. And he goes, we get calls. You're probably the 25th, 26th person that I've talked to over the years that have claimed the same thing. He goes, they never heard anything. I says, but you know about it? He goes, well, people tell us. And I go, what do you do about it? He goes, nothing. We're the Corps of Engineers. We control the water. That's basically all he said. So I was blown away that they just openly said, yeah, which one?
The history of Sasquatch in the Buckeye State traces back to the 1800s, with very particular patterns emerging the more you look into it. For instance, precipitation maps in Ohio change regularly, with higher precipitation totals in the north around 100 years ago, whereas today the south tends to have the edge in that category. I once had researched this fact and found a correlation between potential Sasquatch activity and those precipitation maps in that, during the early 1900s, a massive amount of wildman and ape reports were run in newspapers in the northern part of Ohio, even in areas like Sandusky. Today, this would be utterly bizarre since so much of the northern part of the state is dominated by cities like Akron and Cleveland. The questions that this raises are numerous, and like myself, Mark has been asking these sort of questions since long before I was even aware of the Bigfoot topic. Ohio's Sasquatch history is wildly rich due to the diversity of its ecosystem. It could also be due to the dispersion of its population between large metropolitan areas and small towns, which leaves huge swaths of land completely or very sparsely populated. It's a state that, on its surface, might not appear to be an ideal place for Sasquatch. Anyone who's lived or spent any decent amount of time here knows differently. I have Don Keating to thank for making me aware of the subject of Bigfoot in Ohio. However, Marc DeWerth gets some credit for introducing me to the fact that Bigfoot has been around here for a lot longer than I'd ever thought. Mark not only helped foster an interest in early Bigfoot history in me, but he was the first person in the subject to offer me a platform for my own research. My interest in archival research had led me to begin scouring newspaper archives for old wild man and ape reports around 2014. That same year, Mark began posting my findings on the BFRO website, along with the social media accounts he held for his annual Ohio Bigfoot Conference. It just so happens that one of the first reports he ever posted to the BFRO database was a newspaper article I had turned up, published on September 30th, 1930. And its setting is very near Coshocton, Ohio. It reads, rumors were circulated here Thursday that an ape had been seen near the C&M Railroad Tunnel south of here on Tuesday. After an investigation, it was found that these reports were without foundation. Several people in the vicinity of North Salem, Guernsey County, reported seeing an ape about a week ago. It is thought that an ape which escaped from a circus at Mansfield some time ago is running at large somewhere in this section of the country. The quick discrediting of the ape reports by relating it to an escaped circus animal is something that popped up frequently in these early articles. Typically, this attempt to debunk stories like this were without merit, as seems to be the case here, as there was never any follow-up or any actual report of a missing circus ape. Regardless of your opinion on early newspaper articles involving potential Sasquatch, this article does lend some merit to ongoing activity in and around Coshocton. If you're a proponent of Bigfoot's existence, the question becomes, why is it here to begin with?
Well, you know, it's weird, and I don't know if you've seen this pattern, because I know you've looked into this stuff now for 10 plus years. what is with Bigfoots and strip mines?
Well, I just talked about this last
And
night.
and
I was
is
gonna
it
ask
is it
you about
is
it.
it accessibility? Is it least path of resistance? Is it because there was man-made structures that created these pinch points, drive points, like even for deer? Because deer are going to follow things that give them ease of use or ease of getting from A to B. Bigfoots watch that stuff. And when we leave a construction site, we leave an area, that gives them an opportunity to seriously, you know, hunt these areas. And believe me when I say they hunt.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, because I've been hearing about Wills Creek and Woodbury for the entire time I've been into it, but when did it become a thing? I also talked
Well,
about
you
the fact
remember when you were digging into those newspaper archives. Remember the references of Coshocton near, which would have been Woodbury in the what, 1900s, 1800s,
very late
late
1800s,
where
yeah.
they were chasing the wild man because it was scaring the people. The thing that really, the one that just kind of ticks me off, and it's the Grassman name. You know that was Kenmore.
Yeah.
The Kenmore monster, the newspaper reporter called it the Grassman because it was walking through that tall goldenrod by the outside smoking room that was fenced in.
Yeah.
And the people would say the bum or the hobo keeps coming through, and then when the reporter sent her camera guy or one of the helpers over, they got the key to get into the gate on that side, and of course when he walked through, you couldn't see the guy because the goldenrod was like 6.5, 7 foot off the ground, and this was a huge dark.
Yeah, but do you buy that Kenmore Grassman stuff?
You know,
Kenmore is like...
I know, but think in 82.
I lived... Well, yeah, that's true. But,
And-
but even then, it's still West Akron.
But think of this though, Seth. When I first got into this, I never thought they would be close to, say, Akron, Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Yeah.
I always wrote that off as BS. But as the years have gone on, and my recorders especially, dude, we're getting howls in Cuyahoga Valley in the February. I mean, definitely. I mean, they put on spectrograph. They're Bigfoot howls.
Yeah, my favorite Bigfoot story is out of Cuyahoga
Yeah,
Valley.
that's what I mean. So what is that telling you? That there's 3 million people.
Yeah, but that is a very large green space compared to Kenmore. I guess you're right. In the 70s, I have no idea what that would have been.
Well,
like,
I mean,
or 80s.
here's another thing I remember telling you was this. Don't discount Northwest Ohio.
Yeah.
Because Northwest Ohio, although it's agriculture and there is food, but what do people do there? They typically get up when? The crack of dawn. They have their supper, watch All in the Family or whatever show, and then they go to bed because they're back out there in the morning doing it again. It's very dark out there, and they have big woodlots on their farms.
It also used to be, I mean,
The Black Swamp.
The Black
Black
Swamp. was
Swamp,
right there, yeah.
exactly. So you know the food source is super abundant. And you know, one thing I always tell people is, if you're gonna go look for Bigfoot in Ohio, if you're walking through a forest full of tulip trees and maple trees, you're in the wrong place because they don't produce fruit on the floor. They don't put acorns or mast on the floor. If you're like, Northwest Ohio is oak savanna, hickory savanna, which means tons of nut-bearing trees. That's why the Native American tribes had so many settlements there, and they would do the, you know, they were the ones that taught us how to do burns of the forest because they knew the burns, the white oaks would all replicate and create more white oak. The more oak you had, the more deer you had, which is easier for the hunt. So don't think for a second, Bigfoots don't think the same way. They're looking for forests that, even though they can't get a deer to eat like down there, they're still here. Here's hickory nuts, here's white oak, here's chinkapin oak, all good high-calorie food, and they definitely need that, especially when they have to keep piling calories on.
Well, what is here that they would
What is here down in Coshocton's a lot of white oak in here. And white oak is white-tailed deer's favorite acorn. Now, and I always tell people that go from 2000 to 2024. Go get every year of Ohio's white-tailed deer hunt count on how many head are being taken. I bet you Coshocton, on average, is top 2 or 3 in the whole state every year. And if you correlate that, even just, and say the BFRO database, and you know it's not perfect, because there's a lot of reports that don't ever show on there, because witnesses will say, hey.
Well, even Coshocton only has like 4.
Well,
right?
and
4 or
why
5.
do you, and there's an easy explanation for that, because Don Keating was getting all the reports. And when you have a more local person to go to, and before the internet too, Don was funneling reports in the 80s, lots of them. And
outside of Ohio, people don't know the word that Woodbury. People don't know Coshocton.
No.
Okay, but there are a group of people within the state who are very familiar with these places. When did it come on the radar of those types of people?
Well, okay, well, let's think of this. 1982, Don received a report outside of Newcomerstown over near Tunnel Hill. So he went and investigated that report, was convinced they saw something unusual. He made contact with John Green. John Green wrote back to him, and so that made Don do that first kind of meeting. So people came in from the meeting, and the people that were talking about activity in the area, there were still some in Newcomerstown, which would be Tuscarawas County, but they kept talking about Coshocton, Guernsey, Conesville, AEP lands, Woodbury. And because of that, those initial wave of Ohio researchers, which had been the Don Keatings, the Mark Francises, the Robert W. Morgans, Betty and Leon Parks, those, and Ron Schaffner. And history is important. And I guarantee you, if you factored in Don's database, Betty and Leon Parks, Ron Schaffner's database, you'd see Coshocton be our #1 county by far.
When did you start? First of all, when did you get into the subject? But when did you start researching?
Well, I mean, it was literally because I was in 4th grade, and I remember on a Friday night we would always watch, like, I mean, I'm a lot older than you guys, but they had shows like All in the Family, Chico and the Man, the Jeffersons, stuff like that, and then of course In Search of would come on with Leonard Nimoy. Well, and of course, here it is, Sasquatch in British Columbia and North America, whatever the subject was. And of course, me sitting on Grandpa's lap every Friday and watching this show, and they talked about Bigfoot, Sasquatch in North America, showed the Patterson film. And I remember going to my grandpa, is Bigfoot in Ohio? And my grandpa was an attorney, worked for the government, I mean, very successful. He looked at me and he goes, you know what? My grandpa loved to read newspapers. He goes, I have seen newspaper clippings in Ohio of Bigfoot reports, and he named towns like Minerva, Gallipolis, Newcomerstown, Akron, and he says, it's possible. And I was so excited that on that following Monday at our library time in elementary school, I ran to the library, and of course, Bigfoot, I was kind of scared to ask about it. So I just said, hey, do you have any books on Native American legends? Because I thought that would fall, because they talked on that In Search of episode about how the Native Americans called it Sasquatch and stuff like that. And I remember like going over to the one section of the library where she showed me, and here's the books in the nice case, and I saw the word Loch Ness. So I thought, well, obviously I'm close. And there was a green Mylar jacket, John Green, Apes Among Us. And I remember pulling it out, and you looked at the book, beautiful hardbound book, turned it over, there's North America, Ohio, I think it says 17 sightings. And of course, I went to the glossary and it mentioned some of those cities, and I read that book. That was the first book that I read where as soon as I got home from school, did my homework, I would pick that book up and keep reading. Of course, when you got into high school, I played a lot of sports, and all my girlfriends, they knew that I was into Bigfoot in Boggy Creek because of we'd go to the midnight movies and watch all those crazy, awesome movies. They were like that Ron Olson Sasquatch movie, fantastic movie, where the Bigfoots attack the camp. And this chick I met, she's like, we just started, we're palling around, whatever, going to breakfast, stuff like that. She goes, hey, I got a family reunion on Saturday. Do you want to go? Because she wanted someone to go with her. I said, where's it at? She goes, tip a canoe. So I ended up going with her, and I remember driving as her passenger in her car going.
You were from Cleveland area?
I was like Westlake, Ohio, west side of Cleveland. And so I'm coming down 77, get past the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Clear Canton, and all of a sudden you just notice, like, wow. It changes as soon as you're out of Canton, the greenery, the trees. And then when we got by about New Philly, I think that was the time that I always tell people that the Sasquatch meter turned back on, because I'm looking at these hills with these trees, I'm like, I recognize New Philadelphia as one of the cities that had a sighting, and I'm like, of course I didn't say anything to her, but I was going crazy. So we go down 250, through Uhrichsville, through Midvale, and we come up on State Route 800, and 800 goes south in the state. by Clendenning Lake.
Yeah.
So as we were going down 800, the Dunlap farm was on the left-hand side. It was in front of Clendenning. Clendenning was on the back of their property line, the Clendenning watershed was. And I remember pulling down Bob's driveway. You didn't even see the house when you turned down because it went around so far down. The house was behind the trees. And I remember sitting, and we're in this bowl and my Bigfoot meter's going nuts. So I met Bob, I met Betty, and they had a bunch of family was there, and Bob's like, hey, Mark, would you want to come out to the barn? I'll show you my new calves, because he did Black Angus cows. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Went out there, was in the barn, and here's me the whole time thinking, how do I ask this guy? How do I get some information from him? So finally I said, hey, Bob, I got a question for you. He goes, what's that? I said, do you ever have any strange animal reports around here? And he goes, well, what do you mean? He goes, we get a bear once in a while, a bobcat, I heard of a puma. And I'm like, yeah, anything like that, anything unusual. He goes, well, the neighbor, that's what he called him, the neighbor saw a bear walk across State Route 800 at night and step over a guardrail. And of course, when he said that, I'm like, interesting. Did not say a word. We go in, Aunt Betty, they were cooking inside, all the women were, and it was time to eat, so everyone got together. And so it was so funny because Bob must have came in to wash up and went into the main kitchen area, and Betty must have said, so what'd you two talk about? Because as I'm sitting at the table, she goes, Mark, I go, yes. She goes, I heard Bob told you about the neighbor seeing the bear across the road. I'm like, wow, that was quick. And she goes, do you want to meet him? And I'm like, really? So this would have been 1989 and in the summer. And so I'm like, yeah. So the next morning we pull up to the top of their driveway on 800, turn left, because it's supposed to be the next house down. It was almost a mile down. There was no other houses.
Right.
And so we go in, pull in the driveway. She introduces me, and and he goes, come on back. And he was like working on blacksmith stuff, because he worked at the brick mill, which would have been in Urixville, and he got off at midnight. So he'd come right past the Dunlap farm to go to his homestead, I guess you'd call that. And I said, so tell me about what you saw. And he goes, yeah, I was coming home from the brick plant and past the Dunlap driveway. That would have been to the left. Well, if you went past their driveway, about 300 feet down, the road went like this and this, because there was a creek that cut underneath. So there was guardrail on both sides. And he goes, yeah, there was standing on the left-hand side, the bear was, standing by the guardrail, and when I hit my bright lights on it, he says it did the most amazing thing. I'm like, well, what did it do? He goes, it stepped across the road in 3 steps. He says, but when it got to the guardrail, it just stepped over it. And he goes, I never knew a bear could do that. And I did not say a word. I'm like, wow, that's cool, great, I appreciate it. So we walked back, and Betty stayed in the car, smoking away. And so they said goodbye. I sat in the car next to Betty, and I'm sitting like this with my shoulder away from her, like I could not believe what I just heard. And so we start getting ready to back out of the driveway, back onto 800, and she like stops and looks at me. I could tell she was staring. She goes, what do you really think he saw? And I looked at her, I said, well, what do you think he saw? It was Bigfoot, wasn't it? I said, bingo, thank you.
There are few people more important to the research and record-keeping of Sasquatch in Ohio than Don Keating. He's the guy that really helped shine a light on Bigfoot activity in the state, and for most old-school researchers, he's either the reason they're in it to begin with, or he plays a role in their involvement. During the 80s and 90s, Keating was so active in the field that even I became aware of who he was, despite my complete lack of knowledge about the Bigfoot subject. He appeared at library presentations, popped up on television, and would occasionally be on the front page of our local newspapers. Don began meeting with other Bigfoot enthusiasts in Newcomerstown during these early days of Ohio Bigfoot research, and it was through these talks that many still active researchers were introduced to one another.
And then here's the funniest thing in the world, and you guys will love this. She goes, there's a guy in Newcomerstown that I've seen holds public meetings, and she took me from Tippecanoe by Clendenning all the way to Newcomerstown. And of course, the way she went, she didn't go no state routes. She did through the hills, and we came out up on the backside of the Tuscarawas River, where you go into Newcomerstown, where you cross from the backside. And we went to the library. I go, what are we doing there? She goes, watch. She walks into the library, comes out with his phone number, and guess what was conveniently on the corner of the parking lot? A payphone. And I called him, but he wasn't there. So she goes, well, leave my number, have him call tonight. And he did. He called over at the Dunlap farm, and I talked to Don for about an hour, and he told me about his newsletter, his meetings, which I sent him a check right away for the newsletter and stuff. But I never made a meeting though till like the early 90s, because, you know, unfortunately when you're in your like 20 years old, I mean, I had a lot of stuff. I had a lot of, you know, girlfriends, all this stuff. So you get so busy, and I always wanted to go, but I just, you know, never, oh, that's 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And then one day in the Plain Dealer, my one girlfriend, she goes, hey, look at this, Bigfoot conference today in Newcomerstown. She goes, do you want to go? Okay. And we went down to that meeting, and I know I've told you this story, but it was like, you know, it was like a scene from Deliverance. And then all of a sudden, Don Keating was at the top of the room, and he heard my voice, and he looks and he goes, do I know you? And I said, you're Marc DeWerth, aren't you? Hey, Mark. But here's the amazing thing about that event. There was probably 35 or 40 people, probably 6 states were represented, all the surrounding states, a few here and there. And these people all had stories. And I told Don after that meeting, I said, if you ever need anyone to help you, here's my number. Call me. Because I had very flexible working in the aviation industry. And sure as heck, within a week, he calls. We just got a sighting on 541 over in Kimbolton, which ended up being Debbie Brill, and the one crossing the road. So I did an investigation with him, and before you know, we were just doing tons of them, all over. And
Are you the one that told me about the cop? It might have been a sheriff or deputy or something down. I thought it was down here.
okay, what was the story? There's
It
a lot
was
of
something about like a 10-foot tall Sasquatch crossing the road
and hit
hitting
the stop sign. Yeah.
You were
Okay,
right.
that's at the corner of you can go there, corner of 286, County Road 286 and County Road 6. If you come off of 286, it's a gravel dirt road, winds around, then it starts going down like this. So as the sheriff was going down the road, it was in the winter, it was in February, it was snowing. Okay. He goes, it's snowing, and he goes, I see this guy, what he thought was in a parka, crossing the road. And he goes, when I hit all my lights, think of all the lights on top of a cruiser. He goes, I lit it up. He says, not only was it in a parka, but it was all covered in white gray hair. And he says, I could see the hair hanging down like this, because when I hit my lights, it went like this. So when he hit the lights and the Bigfoot walked, it kind of stumbled. Well, it hit the stop sign, and the stop sign goes whoom. Yeah. And then if you'll see right there, you look to your right, a little bit at an angle, there's the telephone pole line. He said, I spotlighted it as it went up over the hill. He says it went up the hill like it wasn't there. And he's like, I've never been more scared in my life.
How did he come to you with that story?
Okay, Don used to have those meetings. Yeah. He would come in uniform for maybe 2 years and sit in the back corner of the room just listening. And of course, me being the salesman that I am, I would walk up to him. I know you got some stories. No, I don't know anything. I'm just here to, so what do you come every month? Oh, it's just an interesting subject. Well, then one day he showed up in the back corner of the room. He was dressed in street clothes. I'm like, you said you always work Fridays or Saturdays. And he goes, no, retired, come outside. And then he told me everything. He told me about, if you ever read in some of Don's books about Charlie Hunter, he knew Charlie Hunter. He verified some of those stories. Wow. That guy had like a machine gun. Yeah. These were coming down and throwing stuff at his house, and the sheriff, he's like, Charlie, you got to put this away. You know, we don't want to have to take this from you. Yeah. And he goes, and he kept yelling at him. He's right over there. And here's what he told me. The sheriff told me. He goes, so just for the hell of it, I shine my spotlight in the distance where he's pointing at the pines. And he goes, I'm looking, and he goes, I see something big go from one pine tree to the other. But he didn't want to tell Charlie because Charlie was going nuts with the gun. And so he was pretty, but after seeing that one hit the stop sign, but.
How big? Am I wrong?
Okay, now here. Yeah. Now, okay, so here's how we verified it. Well, obviously he's trained to assess situations, you know, that's what he does for, a sheriff does. And he goes, it was huge, and I go, well, he goes, over 10 foot tall. I go, well, how would you know that? He goes, because when it knocked the stop sign down, we have a protocol in any county, you have to call the street department, it doesn't matter, it's the weekend, and they send someone in to replant the stop sign. So he had to sit there for 2 hours until they shut. He goes, I was never more scared in my life. I'm like, what are you scared about? He goes, I had to sit there in the car with my hand on the shotgun, my other hand on the pistol, thinking this thing was gonna come back and pick the car up. That's how big it was. And so he asked the street crew or the county, crew that puts the signs up, how high off the ground it was. He goes, oh, it's 9 foot off the ground at the top of the sign. He said it's top of the sign was here on it, and it walked right into it, flattened it.
Were there other reports then?
Of that creature,
Of that
and
creature?
because it was the white one.
Okay.
The one that Don filmed in
You think it's the
1992,
same one?
it has to be, because that one was being seen all through there. You know, anyone can say anything they want about Don and his film, that's a Bigfoot. There's no doubt. If you actually been exactly where he was, how it all went out, he didn't even know it was there, didn't even know he filmed it for a year. So accidental. But the tracks that I found there on an investigation very close to there in an old cemetery, they were in 4-inch high grass. And even in the 4-inch high grass, you could see all 5 toes because it was the weight was so great, and it followed like a straight line. They were 20 inches long by 9 inches wide at the heel, 6 inches at the heel, 9 inches at the ball. And I followed them across, which would be Township Road 70. Then they skirted the road, and then when it hit the power line, it went right back over, and we followed it all the way up. There was like a big rock formation. That's where we lost it.
So were most of those sightings of that big one, the white one,
Was over in
that's in that
Woodbury,
area?
Conesville.
Do any of those other stories stand out to you?
There's so many reports. The one I remember doing an interview with Don. We were talking to a mother and the child on a single wide trail. They had a deck on the back of the trailer, and there was this huge rock that was sitting in their backyard, like one that just, maybe the glacier left it there, maybe, this gigantic rock. And it was easily 8 foot high, the rock, sitting in their backyard. And the little boy yelled for, "Mom, Mom, come here, there's a giant back here." And the mom came out, didn't see anything, but the little boy sitting on the chair said that he saw it walk through the backyard, and when they went behind the big rock, you could still see its shoulder and head above it as it went by. And this is just a kid that was at the time 7, 8 years old. Why would someone make that up? I mean, you know, those are some of the stories.
What year was that one?
That was in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in the 80s because it was an older report, but they reported it.
Have you noticed any change in volume of reports? Like
Yeah,
up or
of course. I would say in the state of Ohio as a whole, up, but in this area, down, and there's an easy logistical reason. Not as many people that are in it, and this is not to offend anyone, that are truly beating the bush like we used to do. We beat the bush. We went, I mean, I'm in the woods almost every day of the year. If I'm by a waterway, I'm checking out what's in there. I'm looking for what game's living. And if I find something, of course I'm gonna report on it. But the fact is, I just don't think there's enough people that truly go into the woods. They just don't.
The investigation of Bigfoot often suffers from a glaring lack of common sense. Sightings are frequently based on vague or unverifiable accounts, and some investigators rely heavily on anecdotes or blurry photographs, which are easily dismissed as hoaxes or misinterpretations. Rather than applying critical thinking or scientific methods, the Bigfoot community often indulges in speculative theories, attributing unexplained sounds or footprints to the creature without considering more plausible explanations, like natural wildlife or human error. Marc has been involved in Bigfoot research since the 80s. Since his childhood, really. He came up at a time when the internet wasn't even a thing, and his research was based on conversations with real people who claimed sightings, and actual boots-on-the-ground research in places where the creature was seen. Today, the bulk of the effort of most researchers consists of looking at photos with red circles and perusing YouTube for the latest blurry photos to poke fun at or make a half-hearted attempt at debunking. Or maybe it's the other side of the aisle, believing every photo and badly recorded piece of audio evidence is a Sasquatch. Marc has always used the phrase, "keep your skepticals on," a reference to his often skeptical approach to research. It's a good line, and one that is important to remind newcomers to the subject of. The key takeaway from my time with Marc is that A, there just might be Bigfoots in Coshocton, Ohio, and B, staying involved without burning yourself out requires a commitment to finding the truth that isn't common in most people. Somehow, Marc's commitment remains.
I think some people's investigative techniques, they want it to always be Bigfoot, and
Yeah.
you can't be that way. And I think that's probably why I kind of turned out of favor in the Bigfoot community, because, you know, and there are people that have their stories published in books that I could tell you right damn now, they did not have a Bigfoot sighting.
Right.
But because since I didn't say I thought it wasn't, but Joe over there who's writing a book or doing this said it was, oh yeah, they saw Bigfoot. that dilutes our quality of evidence.
Right.
I mean, I only want to be, even though I've seen one right here, broad daylight, I still have to keep my skepticals on, because if they were that abundant, everyone would be having this wonderful story to talk about.
Right.
But when you watch every show, listen to all these crazy podcasts, and there are some great podcasts, don't get me wrong, but there's some of them that, I just want quality information. That people say, why haven't you wrote your book yet? I will write, I promise you, but one thing I will promise you is every county in Ohio will be represented. I want people to say, hey, where do I go to look for Bigfoot in Ohio? Well, you can go anywhere. It's just finding the right biodiversity that you can say could substantiate a Sasquatch coming through and being able to get enough calories while hunting deer and come in and out and not being noticed. And there's tons of places in every county. People don't even realize that it happens all the time. That's why when I read those like old newsletters from the 70s, and you see those reports that back then everyone said, this is hokey. They're probably legit.
Yeah.
They probably are.
Does it hit you in the feels at all when you come here?
Just put it this way, if it wasn't for that day, I would have never been doing the Ohio Bigfoot Conference after Don retired. I wouldn't have been in the field. I probably would have been out of the BFRO, because I was so frustrated that, from the time I started looking into it, that every time you go on an investigative report, you're all fired up, and then when you get there, there's no physical evidence.
Right.
And it was very frustrating, because back in the day before the internet, you'd get a call from like a sheriff's department. Hey, there was a Bigfoot sighting over here last week. Here's the person's name. They said, but it's a week old.
Yeah.
When a week goes by, and if there's tracks, if there's any evidence, it's not there. So the race to get to the site quick was so bad, because the time factor, it's always a delayed report. Now with the internet, you get, well, I saw one, and you can get down there immediately, but here's the problem, are they telling the truth?
Right.
And so many people want to see a Bigfoot, and that's the part of the problem.
Positive or negative that you've devoted so much of your time to
Positive,
Sasquatch?
because I've met so many good people.
Okay.
And and even people that say I split ways with. But I mean, the fact is, any person that I've ever split ways with in the field, I still respect 110%, because they're going out there and trying to find stuff. And I don't have any hard feelings toward anyone or any person. But I would say that I met so many good people, have made so many good friends, and I visited John Green, Bob Titmus, Peter Byrne, DeHinden, all of them. And I mean, long before they were like even doing that, going to the conferences, I mean, I got to meet these people, these legends, and you saw their devotion